It is our December 4th, 2023 Village Workshop meeting. Mary Ann, can I get roll call?
Mayor Young.
Here.
Vice Mayor Brandon. Councilmember Pacher.
Here.
Councilmember Satori.
Here.
Councilmember Bradford.
Here.
Okay, thank you. First up on our agenda tonight, item number 1 is update on the land development regulations recommended as part of the Master Corridor Plan presented by Treasure Coast Planning Council. And Lance will be presenting to us.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. Good to be in the village of Tequesta today. The presentation I have before you, you might have seen it maybe 2 or 3 times. This would be maybe the 3rd or 4th. This pertains to the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council's report that they did for the Commercial Corridor Master Plan. So just a little background, in 2022, the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council conducted a 5-day charrette, which provided feedback from residents as well as members of the business community. The feedback was then put together in a report with the recommendations, and that report was then approved by the Village Council in November of 2022. Follow-up meetings were had with Mr. Dana Little as well as Mr. Allen, and then afterwards we had a few workshops with this council. What were some of the key recommendations put together from their plan? It was district centers, frontage standards, civic open spaces, the measuring of height, drive-through buildings and gas stations, location of parking, primary streets, dark skylights, as well as green design. So I just wanted to put this picture here first just to show what the zoning districts were that they had in their conceptual plan. They had 3 different zoning districts. One was Village Center, which is in the bottom left, Town Center, which is in the bottom right, and then they had Village Center North. So what we're proposing is to have 3 overlays. Overlay was the one that was presented to you guys. Based on the feedback that was provided, we have since changed that graphic. As you can see, it's pretty similar. However, this one actually incorporates the Cypress District. I know that the Cypress District was previously included in the Village Center, is what they had it, or Town Center, I should say. We thought graphically, as well as the way that the regulations were put together, that this would be something that would make sense to go in this area rather than the Town Center. What is the intent? The intent is to preserve and protect the neighborhood character, aesthetics, and uses permitted within that corridor. And then what would be some key, I guess, code parts that are in there? Formula restaurants would be prohibited. We'd like to keep that small scale charm and character for that area. The facades would be closer to the corridor, as well as parking would be located in the rear of the facility rather than in the front, and include some type of civic open spaces, landscape, and tree canopies. So what does the Tequesta Drive area currently have? So it's a mixture of C1, C2, and C3, and the frontage or front setback requirements are 15 feet, 25 feet, and another 15 feet. With this new proposed overlay, we're saying that essentially, rather than it being measured as a minimum requirement, we're doing it as a maximum requirement. So it's requiring the building to be fronting towards the road rather than being pushed back. As well as what else is changing. So as you go up in height, we're saying that the front facade for the 3rd story and above for these such buildings would be required to be pushed back at least 8 to 12 feet in addition to what the minimum is. So this graphic on the left shows that. And then we get into US Highway 1. This graphic hasn't changed since the last meeting. Essentially what we wanted to do is this overlay would only apply to properties that are fronting US 1. These are the setbacks. As you can see, it's C2 and mixed use. C2 allows for 25 feet, whereas mixed use has a 0 foot to, depending on if it's residential or if it's commercial, 0 feet and 10 feet. And as you can see at the bottom, the front setback for this overlay is a maximum of 20 feet for properties east of US 1. That was discussed at the last council meeting by Vice Mayor Brandon, that she would like some portions of it to be closer to the road and other portions to be pushed back, just so we don't have that like tunnel effect of buildings closer to the road. What's the intent? To encourage and provide an enhanced physical appearance, increasing landscaping, clustering complementary uses, and construction of pedestrian-oriented facilities. This is the only overlay that allows for formula restaurants. Formula restaurants, which I'll get into, are more so like your chain restaurants. And as mentioned, parking would be located in the rear for properties that are east of US 1. So with this code that we're putting together, with the proposed code that we have, it now includes a definition for formula restaurants. And essentially it's a business that has the same or similar name, trade name, trademark as other chains. It also has a standardized limited menu of ingredients with food and beverage preparation. And then also it talks about the exterior design, architecture, interior design, and uniformity. And as mentioned, this would only be in the US 1 corridor. Frontage standards are the same as mentioned previously. I'm not going to dwell too much on this. And then we get into the village center overlay. So if you look to the left, that was what was previously presented to you guys on the 31st of July. And what that had was, it included areas of Bridge Road as well as Tequesta Drive. But then if you look to the right of that, there's the Bank of America as well as CVS parcel. Based on the conversation that were discussed at the last workshop, it was discussed that they didn't want to have two overlapping overlays. So what we did was we moved it over, shifted it a little bit to the left, as well as now you can see it actually goes down a little bit to the south area, incorporating more of the Old Dixie and Bridge Road parcels. What is in that area? It's mixed use, C2, C3, and what are the setbacks? 25 feet, 15 feet, and as mentioned, it'd be 10 feet for residential or 0 feet for commercial. And it has the same requirements, which would be a maximum of 20 feet rather than a minimum. In this zoning district, formula restaurants would be prohibited, as well as parking should be located in the rear, facades closer to the corridor, civic open space, landscaping, and tree canopies. And this one's very similar. It essentially wants to have connectivity with the public and pedestrian environment while having, Tequesta Drive, Bridge Road, and Old Dixie be connected. Frontage standards are similar. And then this portion is based off of the Treasure Coast Plan. In the Treasure Coast Plan, they have the different frontage standards. So for example, stoops or shop fronts or porches or forecourts, essentially based on where you're located in the overlays that were provided, then you're allowed to have specific frontage standards. And what we did was we actually put together a setback encroachment. So essentially if you have a building that is at the 20 feet mark, you're allowed to build closer to the road if you want to, based on if you use one of these architectural features or design features. These are examples of them. And then landscaping is important for these overlays as well. We'd like to have, throughout the corridors that we have, we'd like to have some type of street trees, which would include canopy trees, have high quality and architectural compatibility, and consistent landscape development along the corridor. And also you may know that in the beginning of this year there was an ordinance that was passed which essentially beefed up our landscape requirements. One of those things were to increase our landscape buffers from 10 feet to 15 feet. So essentially the way that we have our buildings put together now is that they'd have to have a 10-foot buffer before. Now they actually have to have a thicker buffer. And then also based on Treasure Coast, we have civic open space, which will now be a requirement. Essentially what the civic open spaces would be we want to have some type of green area, not only just buffers, but designated green area. So the ones on the right are the types of civic open spaces that are be allowed. Green would be approximately anything that would be at least 1,500 square feet in size. Plaza would be the same. Playground would be 2,500 square feet in size. Square would be something bigger, which would be 10,000 square feet in size. Attached green would be about 2,000 to 6,000 square feet. And then we have smaller options, which would be forecourt, which is less than 200 square feet, and then pedestrian passageway, which would be less than 250 square feet. And how would the civic open space be calculated or be required? So the proposed overlay requirements would be as followed. With new development or additions of gross floor area equal to 20% or more to the existing building, They shall provide civic open space of 5% of the total site square footage. Also, landscape buffers in the front and side may be reduced by no more than 25% on each side to accommodate these civic open spaces. So how do you calculate the civic open space? So an example would be right across the street, 312 Tequesta Drive, which is a smaller parcel. They're approximately about a quarter of an acre. So based on that, they're at 11,500 give or take square feet. Based on the 5%, they'd be required to have 578 square foot of civic open space. So what would be some options for that? A forecourt or a pedestrian passageway. And then another example would be 221 US 1, which is the Village Square Plaza. They're approximately at 5.55 acres, which is about 242,000 square feet. What they'd be required to have would be about 12,000 square feet in civic open space, which they'd have obviously more options, which would be your green, your plaza, playground, square, etc. And then just parking in the rear, this was discussed before. We want to emphasize obviously pushing buildings closer, one for safety, but then also we just want to make sure that we don't have a sea of asphalt in the front, that we'd like to have some type of design character within the corridors. And how could that graphically be shown? You have figure 1, which would be building fronting 2 primary streets, figure 2, which would be building fronting primary street and secondary streets, and then figure 3, which would be buildings fronting primary streets, secondary streets, and also alleyways. Drive-through buildings and gas stations. So essentially, as the code stands currently, it already has a limit on drive-throughs, and they're only allowed to be in US 1. It also limits gas stations within the mixed-use and C2 zoning districts to be along US 1. Typically speaking, we have gas stations and also fast food restaurants that have these drive-through restaurants, and they always front the road. So what we were saying was that essentially we'd have drive-through buildings that would be permitted to be on the side or the rear rather than it being in the front, and also it should be screened from the public, or the public view. Drive-throughs are also going to be prohibited to be in the front unless it's a full-service fuel station, aka gas station, which would also be screened from public view. And then the next steps. So if council doesn't have any comments, the next steps essentially would be to proceed with these code recommendations of this draft code, and it would go to the LPA hearing followed by 2 council meeting hearings. Also, if council would like to go through with this code process, a zoning map amendment would be required for council to incorporate the proposed overlays that were shown. And that's it.
Thank you, Lance.
I'm open to every feedback or questions that are.
All right, council, I'll open it for discussion. Anyone can start.
Thank you, Lance. Again, I know this is kind of like the proverbial herding of cats. But the civic open spaces.
Yes.
We have irrigation and landscape maintenance requirements. These things just won't become weeds and unkempt or.
Yeah, so also a part of the ordinance that was adopted, irrigation is required as part of those plans, as well as if, let's say, weeds is an issue. Typically speaking, weeds would be considered like a nuisance or whatnot, so if someone decides that that it should be changed or rectified, then they can always call code enforcement, and code enforcement will.
Our current, addressing the US 1 corridor, our code currently says that's where formula restaurants can go, right there. And I think our code also says it's a maximum of 5,000 square feet for the facility itself. That ring a bell?
My recollection is that for the mixed-use zoning district, it has 5,000 square feet, and that's for, it's not only restaurants, but it's also
For
retail
use,
and
right.
things of that nature. But that's in the mixed use. That's not in C2. C2 is more open. You can put whatever the square foot, as long as it meets the code regulations.
I've gone on record of saying how I am not a fan of our formula restaurants. I think there's other places in northern Palm Beach County we can go for that. I've read and looked over some information that's been sent to us on the Stewart formula restaurant, and they talk about they've got a 1,500 square foot thing. Anything above that then comes in for a special exception. I would like our colleagues to consider something similar. That way, we can always look at, not prohibiting, growth within the village, but keeping the fabric of Tequesta truly Tequesta. In my 1 year up here and in speaking through 2 campaigns now of getting petitions signed, there's this fabric of Tequesta that people want. And I think and I'll use this as an example just because it's big and it's corporately owned, an Olive Garden. I don't want an Olive Garden on US 1. But I think there might be some things that might come in around a 4,000 square feet or something like that. So I would like us to discuss putting a minimum or putting a maximum on there, and anything above that maximum as far as the facility goes, coming in for a special exception approval. That way, because with variances and these special exceptions, it's really the only time we can vote our conscience without the fear of being sued because something is zoned legally. But if we put something on there where it's like a variance where we have to give that approval to do that, that's something I would like to at least have my colleagues discuss. So I've be in favor of putting a size requirement of something pretty tight, of about 1,250 square feet. And then anything above that would have to come in for a special exception, just because we then can control the growth and what something looks like. And it might be a little bit bigger. It may not be a formula restaurant, or it might be right on the cusp. It might be a formula restaurant, but it might be something that we feel fits the fabric of Tequesta and is good for Tequesta. So I want to have some type of control mechanism. I'd like to see if we can talk about that.
And you would want that to be incorporated in the overlays, not in the existing code that's
Just
there.
the US1.
Right, in the US 1. Yeah.
If you don't mind, just to add to that topic and for consideration, I feel like a broken record because I feel like I've brought this up in a couple meetings. We keep saying formula restaurant.
Yes.
Do we want to say formula business? So we have in every overlay formula restaurants addressed in some form. 2 of them, they're prohibited, and then the US 1, it allows for them. I do agree with Councilmember Sartori. I know in our October 30th workshop, I do think council is kind of aligned with maybe putting some restrictions on US 1. I would leave it to staff to come up with those square footages, and legal, of course, whatever the best path is. And on location, aesthetics, like I said, Stewart's is a formula business, not just restaurant. And it's a really good example, different situation, different area, but it's a good, starting point. So just as we discuss this topic, do we want to change it to businesses instead of restaurants? For example, on Tequesta Drive, do we want any kind of formula retail coming up on Tequesta Drive? And we just specifically don't want those restaurants. So just want to throw that out there to help with this topic.
And I had limited initially, just for the purpose of this discussion, Mayor, to the restaurants, just because I don't want to bog down, the wheels of progress by everything that comes through. That's going to be over that 1,250 or whatever number, if we do decide on a number of square footage, be it retail versus restaurant. My concern is more of, because I think we need our UPSs of the world, and we need our Pensions and CVSs and things that go along the US 1 corridor. So I was thinking more just for the restaurants, but I'm clearly open to anything restaurant-wise. I mean, any retail, totally, make it totally on retail. But I would want to keep it, I would like to keep the screws a little bit tighter to like about a 1,250 square foot, just so we can monitor what is coming in and being applied for.
And Mayor, when it's appropriate, if I can comment.
Sure, go ahead.
I would like to encourage the council in having this discussion to, speak about it in terms of, the square footage and putting a special exception threshold on a certain square footage, I think is a good, healthy discussion. But I would caution you to, on the records, speak about it in terms of, we want to encourage local business and exclude business that may operate in interstate commerce. That type of comment will get us in trouble, because that goes to the heart of the issue of the Commerce Clause and constitutional prohibitions against restricting an interstate business just because that's what it is, compared to an a local business. So I just want to encourage you to speak about it more in terms of, less in terms of that and more in terms of, size and that sort of thing. Just so that we have a cleaner record and nobody can point to something that we said on the record. Well, well, that's what you said now. That was your intent. You intended to violate the Commerce Clause. So I just want to the extent we can keep those kind of comments off the record, I think that will serve our purposes as well as we can. Thank you.
Is that just for US 1 or all overlays?
Well, the issue is taking a position that we want to prohibit interstate business for the sake, just because it operates in interstate or regional areas compared to the same business that is local. Now I've given you my opinion in writing several times on this issue. I continue to believe that our Tequesta Drive corridor and our Bridge Road corridor are certainly more ripe to eliminate or keep out formula-based because we have a reason to do so. It's a much more difficult argument in the US 1 corridor, as I've told you many times.
Okay, so just to be clear, because that's how it's written right now on the text amendment that we're looking at. So on the Tequesta Drive overlay and the Main Street overlay, where we do not, it's currently written to not allow formula restaurants only, with formula businesses, that more general term. Is that acceptable in those overlays, or would we?
I am comfortable the way this is written in terms of excluding those uses from the Tequesta Drive and Bridge Road for the reasons I've articulated in the past. I think that the argument applies equally to restaurants and to retail or other businesses.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
You bet.
And so maybe on Tequesta Drive overlay and the Main Street overlay, maybe consider, right now it says formula restaurants, and maybe allow formula businesses, but have some, guidelines and standards like where we might consider for US 1. That could be something else.
Just to interrupt if possible, on page 2 of the proposed code, it actually has a definition for large-scale retail sales and services. And essentially, you can look at the first part where it says retail and or services uses that are regional, which means beyond village limits. I guess more so we wanted to get a little bit of feedback, because when you think about regional, that could also be considered like a formula business in a sense. So we wanted to kind of clarify whether or not there needs to be a definition for formula retail, just because it already mentions beyond village limits.
Okay, thank you for pointing that out.
What I'd like to say was, in general, I agree with what Mr. Sartori said earlier about potential limitations for us to consider for US 1 formula restaurants. What that may entail, I would leave it to legal and staff to come up with something for us to consider. But when it comes to formula retail, I consider that to be problematic, because it's very, I think we can go through the machinations of doing it all if you want to. I wouldn't hinder us in that regard, but from my own experience, I found that to be much more difficult to deal with than in the restaurant category. So those are my comments just about the things that were just recently said.
So, just to make sure I'm clear, so right now, the way I read the code and what we're discussing is we're really talking about, so looking at the overlays themselves, it's really talking about formula restaurants and drive-through businesses, right? So businesses right now, or formula businesses right now, aren't even, like, for instance, on Tequesta Drive. Does the code speak to that currently, with businesses? And I'm not talking restaurants, so just, let's say, just as an example, let's say Gallery Square, like a Joseph's wanted to come in that is regional, but there's more than 3. It's obviously a large box, so a lot of square footage. Currently on Tequesta Drive, the way the code is written, could a Joseph, just as an example, could that come in, since it's not a restaurant?
Let me, I don't have the code in front of me, unfortunately.
No, that's fine. I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
So,
Yeah.
my recollection,
Well-
go ahead, Keith.
You know, right now, our code does not address the issue
No, I mean the proposed code.
of,
Oh.
for the current code on the books today,
Yeah.
as we sit here today. We do not talk about formula-based anything.
No.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, if Joseph's met our other zoning criteria in terms of square footage and the particular use in that zoning district, yes, it could come in, as long as it met the other criteria. We do not address the issue at all. Our code is silent on this issue completely right now.
But the proposed code that's in front of us.
We don't mention,
Proposed
Not at
code
all.
in front of you, that went on the books. If Joseph's met the definition of large-scale retail, then no, it would not be able to.
Okay. Okay. I mean, I like the idea of having, in any of the overlays, let's say hypothetically we're, the US 1 overlay, we're allowing formula restaurant, or permitting of formula restaurants in these drive-throughs, or on Tequesta Drive, if we were proposing to allow formula businesses such as a Joseph's. I like the idea of a square footage threshold. I think not to say that we need to have input on every little thing that, wants to come into the village, but since I think it's become apparent from just public comment that formula businesses generally are something that it seems like the village, or at least the people we hear from here, have a, certain opinion about. I like the idea of anything, and I don't know what like Mayor said, I think staff and legal, as far as what that square footage is, or getting into the specifics of it, I certainly defer to staff and legal on that, but I do like the idea of that, whether it's 1,500, 2,000, I mean, I don't know the specific sizes of some of these formula restaurants, so it's kind of hard to say, but I think that's a good idea that maybe we could use in all of the overlays if we're talking about potentially allowing certain formula businesses on Tequesta or the Village Center overlay. But all in all, I appreciate all your hard work that you guys have done, Lance, Nilsson, all your team. I know you guys have had this in front of us for quite some time now. I think you've captured, the intent that we've given you. I think that there's still a few details that we need to work out, such as what we're talking about, Tequesta Drive, if there is a formula business that's over a certain square footage, is that something that we're open to? I mean, we gotta figure that out, because right now, I think there's some gaps. That's my comment.
So can you clarify for me, you are favorable relative to square footage caps for what might be called a formula retail in Tequesta Drive?
Yeah, well, specific to Tequesta Drive, if you're asking me, I prefer to keep that, as local as possible. I think that captures the intent. I think the Tequesta Drive overlay is established to preserve and protect the character, aesthetics, and uses permitted in the corridor. I think the way the proposed code sits right now, I think it captures that intent. I guess I'm really, really talking about the US 1 overlay, where I think that's where most of this is gonna come in anyway, and to have some kind of mechanism under which we can have an opinion on what these establishments are on some square footage basis, I think is a good idea. Just don't know what that size would be. And right now, it's just mixed use, 5,000 square feet. We're talking about the entire overlay.
yes.
To me, that's, I think, something worth exploring.
So particularly for US 1, or?
I mean, if it were up to me, I know, I'm trying to be careful about how I phrase this, given the Commerce Clause, but to me, that's where these businesses belong. It just, to me, the character, the feel, US one, it's, whether we like it or not, they're already there. Tequesta Drive is, to me, is close to our main street, if you will, or our neighborhood street. I like the idea of keeping that formula free, but to the extent that we're in violation of some kind of, the Commerce Clause or otherwise, I like the idea of having that square footage threshold if we have to even consider it for that overlay. I guess, hopefully that clears it up.
And let me try and soften my earlier comment. I am of the opinion that the prohibitions in that Tequesta Drive corridor are very defensible.
Yeah, agreed. US one, not so much. I agree with that too.
Okay, so what I think I'm hearing, so we can give clear direction to staff on this topic, is, so as written now in our agenda, Tequesta Drive does not allow for formula restaurants or drive-throughs. So we would like to keep that as is, but then have staff and legal review some possible standards and guidelines for formula retail to come into that zone. And that would also apply to the Main Street Village Center zone, because right now that prohibits only formula restaurants and drive-through.
Yeah.
Correct.
And then,
If we're capturing retail, restaurants, and drive-through, that really much encapsulates everything, right? There's really no other,
Retail, restaurants.
I don't think that's really, like even if a UPS would be considered retail, like a UPS store or something. Is there any other buckets that we're not thinking about?
Yeah, there's medical, business,
Formula
office
medical.
use,
Yeah, so I guess-
vets. There's other uses that we would,
Like, is formula business a more,
Like a quick clinic, a walk-in clinic type thing.
yeah, because I don't know if
Without
retail
naming-
captures.
There's some big ones too.
Yeah,
And we had one in a conceptual that was presented, and all four of us, might have been all five of us at the time, said absolutely not. It's not what we were looking for.
yeah. So I guess I'm wondering, I just want to make sure we're covering everything.
so make it general, formula businesses, and then
Businesses.
underneath that, it could
Retail.
It could clarify retail, what
Yeah.
other types, and then under that also say, restaurants prohibited, so
Right.
have that main header and then clarify
Yeah,
below for both Tequesta Drive and the Village Center, Main Street, whatever we're gonna call it. And then US one, how it's written now for just the restaurants and drive-through buildings. I did have one comment on the drive-throughs. It states they should be in the side and rear of building and screened by public view with landscaping. What happens if the building orientation, say like you're on US one, but the building is actually, the front elevation is facing away from US one? I want to make sure we write that correctly so that it's super clear that the drive-through shouldn't be facing the street. So maybe instead of same building location, use the street locations, and then same, like if it's, like you think about the Starbucks there, it's on a corner, so you have Village and US one, if we put on the side of the building, you're still seeing it pretty clearly on that corner. So maybe reference the drive-through locations by where it's seen on the street versus on the actual building.
I understand, I think, the point you're trying to make, and I agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah, because
Try to explain that.
the one building in question, the drive-through is in the rear. However, the rear faces US
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Yes. So would this be on page 12, subsection D? Is that
Yes.
what- Okay. Tractors are permitted in the side and rear. So I like to make it more clear that it's really more about visibility from the street. Okay, I agree with that.
We can work on that.
I mean, you do mention in the subsection 1 that they shall be screened from public view by landscaping, but even if it's there and it's a busy establishment, it's tough to completely screen that if it's in the front of the building, so. Okay.
Well, meanwhile, don't we want to ensure that the front facade is always facing the primary street?
Typically, the front facade is facing the primary street, typically. It's not always done
I'm
that
thinking
way,
of one
but-
that's not that way
Yeah.
today.
There's more than one that's
Yeah.
not that way. So,
Yeah.
granted, this overlay should fix that too.
Yeah.
But, just be extremely clear about the locations, I
Yeah.
think benefits us.
I agree.
And on the US 1 corridor, do we want to put any kind of guidelines for, do we want to make it more general for formula businesses, allowing the restaurants and drive-throughs, but then also maybe having some additional guidelines like you brought up at the start of the conversation?
Yeah, I'd like to look at it, see
Yeah.
what they
Okay.
come up with.
Meaning that the square footage would apply to all formula, everything, the square footage threshold?
Well, it might vary per overlay, like I
okay.
said.
Yeah, yeah.
Staff and
Yeah.
legal will have to, thoroughly have to look at what's there now, and, I mean, you have to plan for the future, because
Mm-hmm.
what's there now could either get remodeled or, demolished,
Mm-hmm.
and rebuilt 10, 20, 30 years down the road, so you kind of have to look at it as a whole, but yeah, we'll rely on the experts to do that.
I like that.
But if possible, I'd like to keep that number. Stewart is 1,500, and it's hard to visualize what a formula restaurant or a formula business would need to operate, with the back of the house versus the front of the house. So I don't want to, that's why I didn't want to throw a number. I just said 1,250. I'm looking at the size of a small home. So that, again, leaving that up to staff. But I wanted something where we have to be deliberate and intentional, that if we're going to allow that special exception, that we need to be very clear that we're making this because it is 5,000, it's going to be 1,200 or 1,600 square feet, and our limit is 1,250, or whatever the number comes back to be. So I wanted a number that makes enough sense, that there's some teeth into it, that it serves the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish tonight, is controlling the fabric of what's coming in.
So just for clarification, so you'd like to have a cap, meaning like if said business comes in and it's 1,500 square feet, that's a permitted use, but then if it exceeds that, it's a special exception use. Am I
Correct.
correct in that? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else on formula business
for me.
before we move on?
No.
Okay, is that everything clear, Lance?
Yes.
Okay.
As
All
mine.
right. Next topic, anyone?
Well, let me just say this, if I may. In general, Lance, I agree with the desire to implement standards suggested to us by Treasure Coast, and I understand the use of the overlay district concept. I'm okay with that. I have a page and a half of little nitpick questions. I don't want to bore us with all that. I could write that to you, and you could let it bring me up to speed. But some of the things I noticed, bigger picture would be, so the village center overlay, I may have that title wrong. What's the logic of expanding it to be south of Bridge Road, south of Bridge Road, and then, I think there's another one that concerned me, and the logic of adding South Cypress Drive to the Tequesta Drive overlay. What was the thinking that was behind that?
I think that came from
So
us.
I'll start with how they have Treasure Coast, which is they. So if you look on the right graphic, the way that it's drawn out, they have 3 different circles. So the left circle includes this area as well as surrounding areas, which would also include unincorporated, not unincorporated, but Jupiter. But then it also touches a little bit of Cypress. Then you go a little bit to the right, and it has the town center, because during the charrette process, which I'm sure you remember, Treasure Coast was kind of asking, where is your town center, or where is your village center? Some people said over here, other people said Main Street. So essentially, when they said Main Street, when Treasure Coast put this circle, we wanted to be in line with what they had, because the previous graphic that we had did not incorporate those bottom areas, those bottom parcels. It only incorporated, let me get to it. On the left hand, it only incorporated the parts that face Bridge Road as well as Tequesta Drive, and then Old Dixie and US 1. Of course, we wanted to eliminate US 1 because that's already going to be in the US 1 corridor. So essentially what we did was we just expanded that a little bit further to go a little bit south to encompass both areas that were shown on the Treasure Coast plan. If council doesn't want the graphic the way that it's done, then we can also amend it. But we wanted to kind of keep it similar or close to what Treasure Coast had.
I follow that.
And then as far as Cypress, essentially for Cypress, when we were doing the graphics for it, as mentioned, they have it based off of like a 5-minute walking radius, so meaning a quarter mile. When we were doing the graphics, it doesn't really make sense just because the way that the two circles are set up, you would be essentially being in two overlays, so you'd have two regulations in a sense. And based on the overlays, how we have them set up, the one that's really different would be US 1 per se. The other two are very similar. So we figured just by encompassing Cypress, especially since you have to kind of access Cypress from Tequesta Drive anyways, we do everything that'd be essentially west of the tracks to Tequesta Drive / Sleepbrook area. So that's why we just moved that over to the other corridor.
So, didn't Treasure Coast also make recommendations for Old Dixie Highway itself?
Yes,
Right.
it was also in that circle. But if you
Yes.
see, I can't really point to it. A lot of Old Dixie Highway currently, as it stands right now, is residential. You have obviously the post office and a few things over there, but for the most part, it is residential. So what we did was we wanted to, the areas that are on Old Dixie from the right here. The areas that are on Old Dixie that are fronting essentially Tequesta Drive / Old Dixie, they're still encompassed. Just as you get a little bit north, it's all residential, so that wasn't encompassed. We can also expand this a little bit further if necessary.
Well, no, I just want, we don't need to do that now, but I'd like to have a better feeling that we are ultimately going to do something about Old Dixie, the corridor itself, to beautify it, because that was basically what I recall them suggesting for Old Dixie Highway was
Absolutely.
beautification.
And I can elaborate a little bit on that. I know that was part of their recommendation. I think Doug, Mr. Chambers has a meeting this week with Kimley Horn, so we have the proposal. We have the draft agreement, I think, drawn up, that proposal that we will submit to Palm Beach County, and hopefully they pay for a portion of that. I know verbally they said that they would pay for half of that. So we're going to submit that to them, the proposal, and then hopefully do an interlocal agreement and move forward with the designing phase of it. So we are moving forward with that. We have budgeted for that in the budget. So yeah, it's not necessarily part of this, but it was part of the Treasure Coast recommendations that we're moving forward with.
Excellent.
Which included like straight safety, like roundabouts and different things like that.
Yeah,
There was
that whole
medians
thing, yes.
and yeah.
Okay.
And if I can add on to what you said, so Village Boulevard is omitted and Old Dixie, and I personally disagree with that because currently residential is there, but those are mixed use. So this is planning for the future. So should those buildings be demolished and something rebuilt there, it's mixed use. So I think we should have these standards for those roads.
That's fine. I mean, I didn't want to slow us down, but if that's something that the majority likes, I'd be good for that as well.
And just for feedback standpoint, so as mentioned, I just want to keep in line with what is provided. So what was done in Treasure Coast, as mentioned, they have it as a circle. So the northern portion of US 1 is also incorporated with the Village / Old Dixie area, meaning the water plant, meaning GMH Futures, Brookdale, all those different areas, which are mixed use, which that can be obviously changed in the future, like the mayor said. The only question I have is, do you want those regulations to be the same as US 1, meaning allowing formula restaurants and formula dish businesses and things like that? If not, then we might have to have a separate district for that area. So that's the only
Well,
hesitation that we have.
Would you like an opportunity to study the pros and cons of that, or do you just want us to just throw that out and let you run with it?
I'm open to feedback, and then if obviously we need to change things, we can, but that's the only reason why we have it as 3 right now. We can always include 4, but if you have 4, that would be from Old Dixie all the way up, essentially including Village and that area.
Well, I know.
So that would be the solution.
In the Treasure Coast plan, they did a really good job of identifying the appropriate frontages for each street, separate from that, from the, circle overlay. So I don't know that, with Old Dixie and Village, like the way you have done the overlays now, I think is a lot more, better suited for us than that. But I think it really comes down to just the frontages and architectural types that they we all came up with the public for those roads. So like that data needs transferred somehow to this new text amendment. But I personally think that the overlays you have as now is better than that.
And I guess only question so as far as frontage standards, what do you more so referring to? Are you referring to the porches and things like that, or are you referring to like the distances that are allowable?
No, they just had charts with like the different frontages that were allowed on each road. I
Okay.
thought that was helpful, and it allowed for a variety because they weren't all the same. So I think Treasure Coast, they're the ones that put all the thought in that and made sure that there would be a variety. It would look good together and all that stuff. So I think, ideally stick with that. If we want to change it, that's fine too.
But, so I think what you're asking, Lance, is if, well, I know what you're asking, so do we want it as a whole separate fourth district? And if we don't, I think the question at council, I'm not saying we have to answer it now, is would we want that to be combined with more of like the village center and the Tequesta Drive overlay, or more of the US one?
Correct. Because if you're gonna put some type of regulations, then it'd have to be encompassed in one of the districts or its own district.
If I know we don't have to make a decision now, but if I had to decide right now, I'd say I'd want it to be more like the village center and Tequesta Drive overlay than the US one.
100%.
Yeah.
Agree.
I agree.
100%.
We made a decision. We are making that decision now.
Sweet.
Gave direction.
Yeah, there you go. But we didn't answer if we want it to be a whole separate, and I guess maybe that's after your analysis, that's what's gonna drive that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And frontage standards is a little tricky just because we have the landscape buffers and whatnot.
Yeah.
When Treasure Coast put together theirs, they weren't accommodating for landscape buffers. So we'll play with it. We'll figure it out.
We just really wanna see you up here one more time, that's all.
Hey, whenever you ask me, I'll come.
At a minimum. Probably more like 3 or 4 times, but, Okay.
That's all I got.
That's
I
it.
like these other little things too.
Yeah, I don't really have much else.
Okay, I think I have a couple more miscellaneous things. Give me 1 second. Scrolling through my notes. On the civic open spaces, I know some municipalities have a payout if the developer doesn't, feel civic open space is suited for their site, or they can't fit it, or whatever the case may be, that there is an option to pay the village a fee in lieu of providing that, and then, we could set up, it goes to our civic open space fund, and we could only spend that money on, open space. Is that something we want to consider and have in here, or do we just want to make it a requirement no matter what?
Well, it crossed my mind when Lance was showing us, a hypothetical parcel, and it was X amount of square feet, and therefore they'd have to have a this size and a that size for the different things. On some instances, it made me think that it could be onerous for a property owner in some instances to actually do any of that. And maybe, I don't know how you get there, where is the boundary where you give them an option to do something different, but it might come in handy, like for this little parcel here on Tequesta Drive, for them to do, what was it?
5%.
5% of their land. I mean, that's not a very big parcel.
Would it have to be, we would have to approve it, or it would just be an option that's out there, period? You can either, if you don't want to do, or for whatever reason you can't do or don't want to do the civic open space. 'Cause I've seen this like with art in public places a lot.
Yeah, same concept.
Yeah, but would it be a one or the other, or if they decide that they don't want to do the civic open space, they'd have to come before council in some capacity, and we would have to approve that second option of a financial?
Yeah, I would prefer that if they wish that non-civic option where they give us some sort of remuneration, then I would like that to be at the control of the village council.
I agree. But I'm not opposed to it as long as that protection's in there. I don't think it's a bad idea, because sometimes it might just not make sense, and if we don't have it in the code, then it's not even really an option. And then it's up to whoever's sitting up here at that time to make that decision.
And maybe that's something we can research what other municipalities do, like does planning and zoning review it too? Or I mean, maybe just get an idea of what is kind of the norm in the area for that, because and same, like, you can model the art in public places too, same concept.
It's relatively common, so we can look into it and see what other municipalities do with it.
The example on the right-hand side, that's up on the board, you know, they're gonna put in 12,000 square feet of civic open space. If somebody's gonna come in and remodel or redo that property, where's the most logical place to do that? And, you know, that parking lot is full all the time.
Yeah, it is.
So there's not a lot of, you know, I understand the concept behind it, but there's some properties that just may not make sense, because there's a lot of small individual units in there, and requiring 5 to 6, you know, cars a spot, and, you know, where do you put a civic open space there? So I think having an option that, like Patrick had mentioned and Tom, would be a great idea, because some things it just doesn't make sense. That's what I had asked initially about, what are the requirements for landscaping? Yeah, whatever, put a sprinkler in there and I'll make sure you heat those. Is it really gonna be maintained? And then we've got eyesores within beautiful buildings and beautiful plazas.
Okay.
So yeah, I would, very interested to learn about that.
Yeah, that's a good
Okay.
point.
Glad you brought it up.
Yeah.
That's why she's mayor.
Yeah.
And then, just, 2 more comments, and I'll be quick. The streetscape landscapes, you did bring that up. Do we need to add more to that, or is the last, ordinance we just approved with the landscape revisions cover everything? I wasn't clear on that.
I don't know if I can go out of this.
Whoops.
I have a hidden slide. Based on the conversation from the last meeting, I did speak with Mr. Parker, our resident landscape architect. He said essentially that the way that we did our code, or our new ordinance that was adopted, it's been beefed up to the point that he thinks it's pretty on par. He did have some recommendations. Marion, can you go to the last slide all the way at the bottom? There's a hidden slide.
Ooh.
Yeah, so he did recommend a few things that could be done. It was more so, to be honest, in interior of a site, it's not really public realm. It's not, let's say, like the roadways or whatnot, but the recommendations that he had were to increase the size of the landscape islands within the parking lots from 6 feet to 8 feet to allow for more trees and palm roots system, but then also to increase the minimum planting strips along the foundation of the buildings from 4 feet to 8 feet. Other than that, those were the only recommendations that Mr. Parker had. So anything else that would be like public realm, that'd be more so up to, obviously, the discretion of you guys and village manager and Mr. Chambers.
Can we make it so that if we have adopted a proposed streetscape plan for a certain roadway, and we haven't got there yet because of budget, and probably implementing that on an incremental basis over time, would it be possible for us to say in the code that if we haven't got there and that streetscape is intended to be done, that development of that property should include the installation of the streetscape provisions that we have adopted for that space?
I would have to defer that to legal. I'm not quite sure on that part. If we can include that, kind of like you're contemplating for the future, essentially, is what you're saying.
Yes. Right.
I'm not too sure. I'm not sure if Dylan or Keith might know the answer to that.
So I'm not sure I'm completely clear. In your example, Mr. Bradford, is the plan that's still in the works, is that something that the village would be paying to install and maintain? That would be the intent, and then since it hasn't happened, we'd be looking to place that burden on the property owner to install it during their development. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, but it would become our responsibility to operate and maintain it thereafter.
Okay.
So
I'm
maybe,
not gonna say
maybe
we
a
can't
good,
do it. I think that we need to make sure we do it correctly, but that may be something we can do.
so maybe a good example, I know we have in this plan, Bridge Road has some streetscaping plan. If a developer was adjacent to that and they were gonna develop, that we require them to do the streetscaping on Bridge Road. Obviously, a maintenance agreement would take place, we would take it over, but they would have to install it as part of the development. I think that would be a good example.
Yeah, perfect example.
And I know you can require, you know, I've had codes in other towns where you have above-ground utilities and you require a redevelopment to bury it in front of their property, so that might be in advance of the government doing the undergrounding, so that might be a similar type of thing, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Let's put that on the list to look at.
Okay, and then just last comment, Keith and Dylan, I know you guys did an initial pass of this, and as it's written, you were generally comfortable that it was legally sufficient. Has anything else come up tonight that you would like to comment on in addition?
Well, we definitely got some marching orders to make some edits. Some of, you know, I had made some notes about updating or adding the definition for the regional or for the formula retail. I had, I might want to look at the purpose and intent language, especially of the Tequesta Drive and the Main
Village
Street,
Center.
to really try and distinguish them a little bit more from the US 1 in terms of the character of those areas compared to US 1. Just minor, really minor stuff, Mayor, nothing, nothing, I guess the one question I had, and I can speak to community development staff on the when we start talking about the setbacks for higher stories. My note is on page 9 of the thing, and the question I had is, does this become like a wedding cake effect, and is that what we want? And like I said, that's something that we can talk about more offline, but nothing major by any means.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other council comments?
I have none.
No? All right, any public comment?
We have a public comment. Maurice Lapierre.
Okay.
Maurice Perry, Country Club. Given the village attorney's opinion for the October workshop, you would be totally remiss if you did not amend this proposal to remove the possibility of formula restaurants and drive-thrus everywhere else in the village, as well as in the 2 overlay districts. Recall that you were advised in the opinion of the attorney, the historical precedent of formula restaurants prevented the council from enacting the will of residents and protecting local businesses by restricting formula restaurants. Because we need to protect authentically local businesses, you should immediately act to prohibit formula restaurants everywhere else in the village. The Tequesta Drive overlay district should be expanded to include the mixed use and commercial properties on Old Dixie to the north and south of Tequesta Drive, on both sides of the railroad too, or both sides of the street, and that are not directly on Route 1 in the overlay district, to prevent those areas from having formula restaurants and drive-thrus too. You should maximize the areas that are available for local restaurants and businesses, as that is what your constituents have repeatedly said they want. Also, all overlays ought to include requirements for street trees in the swale, and I think that was the direction we're going. There isn't a mention of trees in the overlay ordinance language, and I realize there's another piece of the code that addresses that, I think, in the buffer requirement. But the types of trees needs to be specified. Palms are insufficient. There need to be canopy trees to provide shade for the sidewalk. The EAC's recommendations for appropriate shade trees should be applied here. There should be a number of trees per linear foot requirement that we do have in the code, and shrubs should be planted underneath them to maximize the aesthetic and environmental benefits. Please ask the landscape architect to add these requirements and the two that he had on the last slide, because he did an excellent job of proposing additional tree requirements that were enacted earlier this year. In both overlays in subsection E3F, and the two overlays are the Tequesta Drive and the Main Street Drive, please remove the mandatory sculpture or mural. Public art today is almost universally hideous. When it was suggested in both charrettes, it was roundly rejected by residents. We should not encourage, let alone require it. And we should never encourage it unless we provide extremely clear guidance that require classical art forms appropriate to the village and review by an art board with complete discretion to reject proposals. Recently and repeatedly, the village attorney's advice has referred to historical record as precedent to determine the legally permissible character of a space and what the council can do, so you don't want to undermine the village's interest and compromise the character of the village by requiring property owners to put it in whatever kind of art on their property that they choose. There is not a municipality nearby that has any public art that is worthy of that name, and we don't want to participate in the visual blight. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? No? Any other comments from council? Okay. All right, moving on. Agenda item 2, discuss implementation of quiet zone for the Tequesta Drive Railroad Crossing. Jeremy?
The village has maintained established safe and quiet railroad crossing as part of the strategic plan dating back to 2021 and has been discussed beyond that period. As part of the discussion, the village would hold off on any further discussion about the quiet zone application until Brightline had an established schedule. As most of you guys know, in October they went to their full, complete schedule. Estimated 30 trains a day are coming through the crossing. There is a mechanism in place that has been established where localities that could meet certain safety requirements might designate as a quiet zone. It's a segment of the rail of the public highway rail grade crossing. Upon satisfying the regulations, technical requirements, locomotive horns would not be routinely sounded within this quiet zone. And that's for our specific crossing. As you guys are aware through our conversations, there are 2 other crossings that would have to meet that criteria if the horns were going to be silent through Tequesta. The jurisdictions that want to establish a quiet zone are first required to mitigate the increased risk caused by the absence of the horn. Several years ago, the village implemented safety measures at the crossing that mitigate some of the safety risk with the dual track, and one of which being a high-speed rail. It is important to note that train horns may still be used in emergency situations or to comply with other federal regulations, including the other 2 crossings. Part of this discussion, we've provided where county line, where Martin County has provided their stance and waiting until September of 2024 before they apply for a quiet zone. We do not, as you guys know, we don't have any jurisdiction, and I'm pretty sure they're pretty stout on their stance for that. And then Town of Jupiter, I believe, is working on a quiet zone application. I do not know what their time frame is. The application would be submitted to the Federal Railroad Administration. The process will take several months. There is no cost associated with the application itself. Depending on, if council wants to move forward with us, we'll reach out to Treasure Coast Planning Council for assistance and guidance on this, as they have helped a couple other municipalities in this endeavor. As part of it, I also looked at, there are 40 crossings within the state of Florida that are established quiet zones. And then I reached out to a couple municipalities that were close, that were on that list: Boca, Delray, and Boynton. I think all 3 cited when they did this a couple of years back, 2018, 2019, that the horn noise was an issue for them, and that's why they established it. None of them are reporting any issues since establishing the quiet zone. And so with that, it's open for discussion, give council direction on how you guys want to proceed.
Great, thank you. Council, we'll open it for discussion.
Yeah, I mean, this is tough. I don't live close enough where this is something I have to deal with, but I certainly can understand how residents that have to hear this thing 30 times a day, I guess, it could become a nuisance. That being said, the horn obviously serves a purpose, safety being probably the only or the most significant. So it's a tough one. I think the other factor is that if Martin County ultimately doesn't pursue a quiet zone, my understanding of the way it'd be a quarter-mile prior to county line, I think, that they'd have to sound the horn. So I guess the other question is, who knows what's going to happen, but let's say that we did somehow institute a quiet zone and Martin County didn't on county line, is it even solving the problem?
Right.
That's kind of, I think, the unknown, why even, so they're talking, what was it, September of '24?
Yep.
They're gonna reevaluate in September, doesn't mean that they will do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's to me the biggest unknown at this point, is we might go through all this, and this could take several months. Maybe we get it, maybe we don't, but at the end of the day, it might fall flat if Martin County doesn't pursue it or decides come September that they're not gonna do anything about it.
That's my comment, Patrick, is the same. That number one, it's all about safety. I mean, I don't think you could replace a horn. And I know I couldn't sleep at night if I took part in a vote right now to say, let's institute a quiet zone and something happens. I just can't sleep at night with that. But like as Patrick had mentioned, if they don't enact it in Martin County, so you're still going to hear it as it's approaching county line, which is going to impact our Tequesta Drive. I'd like to see all three of us try to get on the same page and if we were to do something and do it at the same time. I say that knowing I live a half a mile from the tracks and I still hear it. I can only imagine what it's like if you live right on it, but there was a train track there when people bought those homes and chose to live there, and it's unfortunate that they never anticipated there would be a high-speed rail going through. But I agree with Patrick, if Martin County's not going to do anything, it doesn't solve crossing number 2, which is Tequesta Drive, and it sounds like Jupiter is going to be doing something at some point, but I would like to have all three of us work together in concert. But I'm not ready for it yet. I'm not ready to say to install a quiet zone and move forward with that. I just think there's too many people that are local to here that may be elderly, not familiar with I expressed my concerns with how the arms were coming down, a couple months ago. And it happened again yesterday or about 2 days ago. And my wife and I got a little panicked in the car. It's like, do I accelerate or do I go? And the horn wasn't ringing yet. It was just the lights and just the panic and the anxiety that comes with that. Yeah. So I'm just not ready to move forward with it yet. I need some other compelling reason why to move forward.
Me? So I live, of those people sitting on this board, I live the closest to the railroad tracks. I'm right just on the west side of Seabrook Road. And when you hear people complaining about it, it's for real.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you can't really enjoy a half an hour or an hour on your back porch. It's just unbearable.
Yeah.
A couple of things. Now, I know from experience, in college I lived 2 blocks away from the main rail line between New Orleans and Atlanta. And let me tell you, they went through it very fast, but you get used to it. And after a while, you don't even realize it's happening. I don't know how to explain that, but it's a phenomenon. So it will get better over time because we will become used to it. But my concern, and let me just say this, we did have a quiet zone back in the late 80s and the early 90s. And I learned, I think in the early 2000 when, FEC comes through every so often to do an intersection upgrade and they make the municipality pay for it. I think that there was that period of time where they somehow did away with the quiet zone. I wasn't working here at that time, but we used to have that, and Martin County never implemented a quiet zone at county line, but Jupiter had on Riverside. It was better, but it wasn't perfect, okay? It was, not as bad as what we're dealing with today. But I would urge caution at this point in time, along what these 2 gentlemen have just said. I continue to see stupid stuff at county line, Tequesta Drive and Riverside Drive. Some people are not getting it. They do not know the risk that they're faced with and what can happen to them in a split second. And I would be, you know, for example, if we said, you put it on the next agenda, we're going to go ASAP, I would not do that. I think at a minimum, we need to get through the end of this current winter season with all of the snowbirds, let everybody get a taste of this thing, of getting used to it, acclimated to it, transportation-wise, and then I'd be in favor of it. But I would like to know what's the estimated cost that we might have to bear to do the improvements. And I would continue for, you know, if I were to ask Jeremy to ask Jupiter and Martin County to keep us informed about how they're progressing. But I would wait until the season is over before I would even implement it. Now, there's one other thing I wanted to say. It was either at the very end of spring or around the beginning of summer, the United States Transportation Secretary was somewhere in Palm Beach County, and it was on the front page of the Palm Beach Post, and he said words to the effect, be patient, Palm Beach County, money's on the way, because Brightline just was about to crank up, I think. Money is on the way, and we will make this route safer than it is today. Now, if he comes through with the money, maybe some of these safety improvements would reduce our cost at that time. That's pure speculation on my part, but if that helps us have a safer crossing with a quiet zone, that'd be fantastic, but we just don't know what that would be right now. But my bottom line is I wouldn't do anything right now. I would wait till season is over at a minimum.
So just real quick, you know, our quick analysis, and I know Doug's had a few meetings that we feel like the improvements are done to that intersection. Obviously, if we do an application, they go, oh, you haven't checked this box, but we don't think there's going to be any major costs that come with that intersection. I mean, don't quote me on that, but that intersection is set up for what we need for a quiet zone to our knowledge of that. The only cost that may come, and we need to do some more digging on that, is there are people that help us go through the Federal Railroad Association to apply for that. We may have to take on a consultant to help us with that. There may be some of that cost, but when we get to that point in several months, we'll bring this back to you kind of after the season, and we'll have some of that ironed out, and then we can discuss this again in several, if that's what the consensus of council decides. So.
Thank you. I'm extremely sympathetic to the increased noise that our residents and businesses are facing. I don't live right by the railroad tracks, but I do hear all the horns at my house, so I can't imagine how loud it is when you're right by the tracks. But I do agree with what Councilmember Sartori said. Like, I don't think I could stomach applying right now and then something happens. Waiting through the season might be a good idea. Something I know staff was trying to get this prior to the meeting, haven't been able to find anything, but I would really like to see some statistics and safety data on what are the statistics with incidents in a quiet zone versus ones that are not a quiet zone. I know they've had no luck yet. Did Martin County say they're doing a study? So I don't know if we could see what their results are. Are they not doing a formal study?
They were just looking at the data that, from what I understand, they were just looking at the data for the next year on their crossings and what that means. So
I think if between now and I guess maybe April would be when we revisit this, or April or May after season, it'd be really helpful to have some kind of data. There's got to be data out there to kind of help aid us in our decision if it's going to be something that we should consider without jeopardizing public safety.
I agree. Yeah.
As out of curiosity,
Mayor, I can add a couple things at the appropriate time.
Go ahead.
Back in 2013, when this first came up, when it was all aboard Florida, I was asked to research creation of railroad quiet zones for the village. By way of some historical information to add to what Mr. Bradford told you. And in 1984, the Florida legislature had passed a law that allowed local jurisdictions to impose railroad crossing horn bans between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. along the FEC corridor. Some counties and some municipalities did that. I'm reading my memo. I had to have gotten this data from somewhere, but Florida experienced a 195% increase in railroad collisions during those whistle ban hours. And as a result, in 1991, the Federal Railroad Administration enacted a federal preemption over state whistle ban laws, which required whistles to be sounded at all public grade crossings, which included the quiet zone application process as well. So, yeah, I think that at least back in the day, not necessarily the quiet zones, but when Florida allowed local governments to have the whistle ban in place overnight, there was significant increase in incidents. The other thing that I had in my memo, anecdotally, I noted that the cost per grade crossing, again, anecdotally, was between $300,000 and $500,000 all in. Whether Federal Highway Administration or Federal Railroad Administration funds are available to assist with that, I don't know. And then the only other thing I'll add, you all know I grew up in Tequesta. I lived on Lee Road, which is pretty close to the railroad tracks. And I agree with what Mr. Bradford said. You know, it's just something that becomes a fabric of your existence, and it sort of blends into the background after you get used to it. So, you know, take all that for what it's worth, but I didn't want to let you know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keith.
Mayor, can I just ask a question?
Absolutely.
Do we know, does the Bright Line and the CSX, do they, or the FEC, do they slow down as they go over the Loxahatchee River? Is it like half speed?
Yeah.
I think so.
Well, there's a little bit of comfort once we do.
Doug, would you mind coming to the podium? Because I know you've emailed this to me before.
Yeah, because there's a little bit of comfort knowing that, you know, if it's a quarter mile away and it's going 60 miles an hour versus
Yes,
120
as
miles
they
an hour,
approach
a
Tequesta
little bit
Drive.
more comfort when we do get into a quiet
As they
zone.
approach Tequesta Drive and then head towards Riverside Drive, they decrease to about 40 miles per hour.
Okay, it appeared so. I didn't know if that was just a testing speed
Yeah.
or something.
And just to back up for a minute, we do currently meet the criteria for a quiet zone. So all of that work has already been done. It's a matter of filing the paperwork and getting the application in.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then,
So-
if the train Bright Line is going north,
There you
when
go.
does it get to full speed again?
After
Do you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, after it crosses the bridge?
River.
After it crosses the bridge, correct. Yeah.
No,
No.
when does it get, so it crosses the bridge, when does it get up to full speed again? Do we know
I
that?
wouldn't know beyond Riverside Drive where they
Okay.
pick up speed again.
That was my question.
Yeah.
Probably by the time it gets to Western Drive, I mean, if they're slowing down to 45, and what's the top speed? 60?
110 something,
Okay, so
120?
maybe
I don't
it's
know.
not.
Well, there's definitely a grade, an uphill
Yeah.
grade between Riverside and Tequesta Drive, and then it sort of levels off.
And I'm looking at the schedule right now. Tom, you might be able to answer this since you hear it. What, do you hear this throughout? I mean, it looks like they have some pretty late.
Over
this
the
goes-
weekend, this past weekend, it felt like Bright Line was 6 to 8 times a day, and then, of course, the FEC is whatever it
Yeah.
typically was.
But do you hear these as late, like into the later hours of the night?
It seems like, yeah, but I sometimes, yes, I do hear it, but sometimes I hear it and realize I didn't hear a whistle go off, and because I just hear this
Yeah.
noise going down, you know.
'Cause I didn't realize it went as late. I mean, they've got some pretty late routes here, which okay.
It's right now, it's aggravating, definitely. It makes your being outside uncomfortable. But like I said, it'll fade away.
Any other questions for Doug while he's?
No, thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Doug.
Cool.
So I think the direction is to revisit this in April or May.
Yeah.
All right, any public comment?
My name's Jonathan Dale. Just a couple of quickies.
Can you state your address, please?
Oh, I'm actually I'm in Martin County, but I'm right next to the railroad. And I was looking to Tequesta to be a leader in this. But just, I studied the train a little bit. And one comment about back in the day, there was a lot of stuff, an increased thing when they didn't have the horns. Well, all of the improvements here to double gate them and stuff like that is a great mitigating factor because you can't drive around the gates anymore. And that was a big thing. They run as late as 11:30.
Okay.
And they accelerate from Tequesta Drive going north. So they're going faster and then past county line, then they really take off.
Okay.
But I would encourage Tequesta to be a leader and not a follower in this. At least make the application. You can always rescind it, I assume. But since it does take a while, you know, that cuts down 1/3 of the noise. And I've been here a long time, and I've never gotten used to it. The only advantage is the Bright Line trains' horns are not quite as loud as the freight trains. And the freight trains increased the decibel level of their locomotives about 3 years ago.
That's right.
So they're really loud.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? All right, any other council comments?
None for me, Mayor.
None.
Okay. All right, moving on to the final agenda item number 3, discuss the vacancy created on the Environmental Advisory Committee. Jeremy?
So, as you may know, and by evidence of Mr. Bradford being on the council, that created a vacancy on the Environmental Advisory Committee. Mr. Bradford's term expires May 8th of 2025. With a vacancy to the board, a position is advertised typically, a position is typically advertised and we take applications. Applications are submitted to village council and then we appoint an applicant. So I guess the discussion tonight for council and direction to staff is, you know, are we gonna keep the advertised position and appoint someone to fill the remainder of the seat, leave the seat vacant, and then when Mr. Bradford's term on council expires, it's temporary, reappoint him to the EAC. So staff is just looking for direction for that. As you guys know, every, I guess it would be May, we appoint to those seats, and so there's usually 2 seats available on the EAC, I believe. I don't know if I have the current one, but there should be 2 people up for appointment come May of '24. So that's typically when we do it. So we just need direction from council on how you guys want to, what you guys want to do with the seat.
Thank you. Council?
I hate to put Mr. Bradford on the spot, but Mr. Bradford, are you interested in going back to the EAC?
About a week ago, Jeremy called me. I think he called me, or it was face-to-face or a phone call. He asked me if I would be willing to go back. And I told him, if you want me and if you need someone, then I would do so. And it's actually going to be a lot easier going forward if I understand things. Jeremy set up a procedure whereby Jay and they will do the agenda and the backup, which I've been doing for 4.5 years. So that would make my life a lot easier. But the answer to is that I will be happy to do it if you want me and you need me.
Is our committee, is there a vice chair that can kind of steer the ship?
Yeah, Jessica Namath is vice chair. She'll be at the chair. She's already been advised of this, and so she will do that. And obviously, she's running for election, and will address that situation if it comes to fruition. So,
I'd be in favor of keeping the seat open.
Yeah, I would too. I mean, especially Ms. Namath was in here at our last council meeting. I know she had public comment, had asked, and definitely indicated that you are a huge asset to the committee. So, assuming you're still interested, I mean, we know that there's a defined end date to this, right? So,
Yeah.
assuming you're still interested, and it sounds like at least the spokesperson for the committee would like to keep you on it, I think we should keep the seat open.
I have a little different point of view, kind of thinking on a more global vision there. You know, sometimes you can get yourself, make an exception for one, make an exception for all. This is a unique situation, but I don't want to set a precedence that we do this. It's very common that someone leaves a board or committee to do something else, that they forfeit that seat and don't necessarily get it back. You have added immense value to the EAC. You're a wealth of knowledge. I would think that you're not going to go away. If someone calls you with a question, I'm sure you'd be happy to answer. And I think maybe we could take applications, see if we even get any. We know sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. And then once Councilmember Bradford, I'm going to have to get used to saying that because I'm so used to saying Mr. Bradford. Once Councilmember Bradford is off council, he could apply for the next open vacancy. And I'm sure we would heavily weigh him being appointed again at that time.
In fact, I think I would be required to apply because I've resigned, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's fine with me. If you let me know you want me, I'll reapply.
Yeah, because I think like if he was appointed to council in August, would we have left the seat open that long? I know the timing, it's not as, it's a short period of time, but I think just, trying not to set a precedence in the future. And we need to think kind of in those terms as well.
I guess, and I don't disagree, but if I'm playing devil's advocate, and let's say that Councilmember Bradford did want to seek the appointment, but also really wanted, and let's say EAC was just really hard to get onto, right? So I would not want that to discourage someone from, or in Councilmember Bradford's position, to have had to choose between one or the other. That's the only concern I would have. I know that some of our committees are a little more, there's more demand there than others as far as, people applying for the seat. But I think this is an extremely unique situation. It could definitely come up again. But the reason I was in favor of keeping it open was just because of how unique the situation and the short amount of time. But, it could all be a moot point anyway come May. There may be only one or two applicants anyway, and it won't be a big deal. But I just would hate to see him lose his seat on that, because I do know that he's a big asset to that committee. But again, that may not happen, so.
Yeah, and I mean, we could give very qualified applicants that have really relevant experience, and it's not bad to have new points of view. Again, you have done amazing things on the EAC, so I'm not downplaying anything.
Yeah.
But, having a new person that they would have, qualified, wouldn't be bad either. And like I said, he could very well still get appointed again once he's off council and applies for the next time a seat is up for reappointment or appointment.
Whatever the wish is for me to do, is fine with me.
Jeremy, can you remind me, how many, you said there was 2 open seats? I'm trying to find it on the summary.
I'm gonna go back and say, please don't quote me on that,
Oh,
because
okay.
my list here may not be accurate, but, so please forgive me and please excuse what I said.
Okay.
So I don't have that, Lori. I can get with Lori. I can give you guys that information, because I don't know that my list is up to date.
Okay, but if I'm understanding correctly, since he resigned regardless, he still has to apply? Is that what I heard?
I think so, yeah.
So, I guess in that case, so I guess the question is do we keep it open until May, or do we start accepting applications now to fill it immediately when he wouldn't have the opportunity? So it could get filled before May.
Correct, yeah, we could take applications.
And then fill it
I mean, we
before
could do what we did like for the council appointment, may or may not appoint someone, but kind of going along with lines you said, I mean, it's tough to get on boards and committees sometimes, because especially with like planning and zoning EAC, usually our practice is like, P&Z, the alternate, gets bumped up, so it's hard to even get in. So I think a lot of times people are discouraged because it's hard to even get on some of those boards and committees.
I get that. Are there alternates right now on EAC?
No, nope.
Okay. I could go either way on this. I mean, I guess if, I don't know. That's, I guess if Councilmember Bradford was like, I definitely want to be back on it, you know, and you'll still be around, we all.
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere.
I guess I don't have a huge opinion either way on this one. But I do see your point of allowing opportunity for others. So I guess there's no harm in accepting applications, particularly if we say that it's a may or may not, but I don't know if that's a good thing to do all the time. But maybe it could be a good thing to open it up for somebody else.
I may not get applications. That has happened before. I think on like one of the pension boards, maye. I feel like it's happened once.
Pension
We're like,
board's really tough to fill.
we didn't get anyone.
So that one's an exception, because that's hard to fill, so.
So you never know, but,
Yeah. Well, I know we have some folks that are definitely interested in pursuing council that we've seen in the past, that, you know, everyone knows that joining a committee is kind of your first, other than Residence Academy, so there could be some more, so I don't know, so P and Z, that one's like, you have multiple alternates and all that, so that one's kind of, that's a long wait. So this could be a good opportunity for somebody, so we could have more attention, but I'm kind of talking myself in circles right now, but.
okay. Councilmember Satori?
I'll stand by my initial comment that to keep it open, but I don't think we lose either way.
Yeah.
I mean, Mr. Bradford's always going to be around, and we'll be sitting in the audience or up on the dais. I imagine so. He would do that. So, but I stand behind my original position. But if it's 2-1, then that's fine. Let's move forward.
That's a question, actually. So, because I've never had the pleasure of serving on a committee. I tried doing P and Z, but there was a conflict at the time. If you weren't on the committee, are you still able to? Are public people from the public allowed to participate in committee meetings, sit there, listen, just like this, and express opinion and all that? So,
Yes, they can attend the meetings. People like Keith might advise them not to publicly speak, because people might gather what their opinion is on a village matter or something.
Yeah.
But there's no prohibition relative to elected official attending a committee meeting.
okay.
Keith's right there. I don't know what.
I've attended one before.
Oh, I mean after May. I mean, like if someone filled the seat and you still wanted to be involved, you can attend, obviously, but you can't really. You're not there to express an opinion.
Right.
They take public comment.
I don't mean that. I mean like actually something that would. How do I state this? I just know that Mr. Bradford has a lot of historical. Like he knows Tequesta as well, if not better than anybody. So that's when I say he's an asset. I've never attended one of the meetings, so I don't know exactly what happens there, but there are very few people in the village that have the historical background that you do, which is largely why you're sitting up here today as well,
Yeah.
in addition to all your qualifications, but I don't know. Anyway, I should probably just stop talking about it.
So usually, first, is there any public comment? No, okay.
No?
Keith, I know typically when there's not consensus on a workshop, it doesn't move forward. Is that stand true with this? Because there's not consensus.
Yes.
Consensus being unanimous?
You're all in consensus, meaning you're all in agreement with a path forward. Otherwise, if it's an item that needs a vote, it would need to be placed on your next council agenda for action.
Okay. So do we want to do that because we're not on a consensus now?
We'll also allow Councilmember Brandon, or Vice Mayor
Yeah.
Brandon, to have an opinion on it, I guess.
Okay, let's move it to December's council meeting. All right.
That'll force me to have to vote as well, right?
Oh, would Mr. Councilmember Bradford be able to vote?
Unless there's a special financial benefit to him voting on that action, which I do not believe there is, then yes, you would vote on that item.
We're still not paying.
Unless you're drawing some big fat salary from your service on the environmental.
If there is, I would like to apply as well. Just joking for the record.
So we'll bring that to December for a vote, and then we'll move
Yes.
forward accordingly.
Okay. All right, with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
All right.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Tim.
You're welcome. Have a good night.